What's going on, guys? Stefan here, S-Tech Garage. Thanks for tuning in. Today, and the next couple of episodes actually, we are going to be focusing on the suspension of this 2016 Lexus GS-F. Now, I love the way this car rides as is. And it's really a shame that I have to do this, but we are going to be lowering this car. With the new wheels that I put on it, it has a really weird stance. Here in the front, there is a huge wheel gap, and then in the back, there is much less of a wheel gap. So it is reversed raked. The front end sits higher than the rear, and it's a bad look. I don't really like it, and we're gonna be changing that today. Show you over on this side. You can see it's what I call a reverse rake. So what we went with here are some Tein lowering springs. I actually called them, because I used to call them Tein. It's not Tein, it's Tein. So I know I'm pronouncing it right. But we went with their SKTB2-AUB00 lowering springs for the RCF and GS-F. So on the GS-F, they are going to lower the front 0.8 inches and they are going to lower the rear 0.6 inches. So it's going to lower it a bit more in the front. It's going to level the car out, and the wheel gap in the front is going to match the wheel gap in the back. And it's not going to change the ride much because the spring rates on these springs are only between 5 and 10% stiffer than the factory springs. And they are built to match the valving on the factory dampers. So these should coexist with the factory shocks very well, and it shouldn't really affect the ride quality much. Now, one thing that we are going to have to do is we're going to have to modify the bump stops, both on the front shocks, or the front struts, and the rear shocks. So we are going to have to remove the rear shocks from the car, and then modify those bump stops. We're going to get that all on video. Now, I will leave a link to these guys in the video description below. And then you're also going to need a set of spring compressors for the front shocks. I will also leave, or the front, I keep saying shocks, the front struts. And I'm going to leave a link to one of those in the video description below as well. If you buy from that link or those links, it does help us. We greatly appreciate it. It allows us to keep doing things like this. Now in the rear, the last time I got an alignment with factory ride height, I was already at 2 degrees camber. I was just at the spec, at the limit of the spec. So by lowering this, it's going to throw my rear camber out. So what we also have coming later today are a set of Figs Engineering adjustable upper camber arms for this car. So we're going to go through the whole process on how to set them. They tell you to set them to the same length as the factory links or control arms until you get to an alignment shop. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to probably go between 1/4 and 1/2 inch longer on both sides, and that should bring my camber out quite a bit. I'd like to be between 1.5 and 2 degrees, so that's what we're going to shoot for. And then once we're done, we're going to drive the car around town a little bit, let the suspension settle, and then later on this week, we're going to take it for a wheel alignment, get everything nice and straight. That way we don't have any issues here. Now, another thing we're going to be doing in the front end, also by Figs Engineering, is a set of polyurethane lower control arm bushings. These cars are known for having liquid-filled lower control arm bushings, and they have a lot of deflection. It can create some inner tire wear and just some numb steering response, especially under braking and cornering. So we are also going to go ahead and install them. We're going to get this whole suspension dialed in to the way I want it, and then we're going to move on to some more performance items. Now, I am by no means a track monster. If I'm honest, I've only been on a drag strip a handful of times with my Mustang, my Subaru, and that's really it. This car is never going to see a road course. It's probably never going to see a drag strip, especially now all the ones around me. Eatontown's closed, Atco's closed, so I don't even have anywhere to take this. I drive it semi-aggressively on the street here and there. I am a very enthusiast-oriented driver. I like to have fun. So as long as we can tighten this thing up without making it too harsh to where I don't want to drive it, I'm going to be happy. And I think with these springs, the control arm bushings and the rear upper control arms, I think we're going to do just that. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to get you set up on the quick jacks here. We're going to pull the front wheels off the car, and we're going to start in the front. I have everything here that I need to do the front springs at least, and then we can do the lower control arm bushings with the springs and shocks in the car, or struts in the car. It really doesn't matter. So let's get started. All right, guys, so like I said before, we're going to start up front. It's the easiest side to do, in my opinion. So we're going to go ahead and pull the wheels. These lug nuts are 17 millimeters. So what I have here is a plastic coated 17 millimeter socket. That way we do not damage the bore that the lug nuts sit in on these wheels. Comes in a case here. We have a 17, a 19, and a 21. I'll go ahead and link one of these in the video description below as well. If you care about your car, you care about your wheels, these are great to have. Alright guys, so under here there's a few things that we're going to have to do. Number one, we have to disconnect the brake hose here from the side of the strut. We have to just double check that our ABS sensor, actually, you know what, that is our ABS sensor. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect that. And then we have this through bolt here that connects the strut to the lower control arm. And then we may have to disconnect this guy here. This is basically the knuckle where it goes up to the upper control arm. I'm going to try to snake the strut out without doing that, but we may have to take it off. So let's go ahead. These probably are going to end up being 17s. Let's double check here. Nope, not a 17. It's probably a 19 then. Yep, 19 it is. So we're going to go ahead and zip this through bolt out. We're going to pull that 10 millimeter for the ABS sensor. And then we're going to come up here and unbolt these. These are either 15 or 16s if I remember, the three of them. And the strut should drop right out. And like I said, we may have to disconnect this upper control arm, but let's see how we do. Out. Okay. How far will this will not really drop that far, I don't think, unless we disconnect the sway bar end link, which I would rather not do. So let's go ahead and pull this upper control arm out. Alright guys, and now that we got that off, we're going to go ahead and strike the knuckle with a hammer, and it should jar that upper control arm loose so that we can get the strut out. There we go. Upper control arm is out, and this whole knuckle will come forward like so. We just have to be mindful of that brake hose there. Now we can go ahead and pull the 10mm out of the shock. Okay, that is out. I'm just going to go ahead and put it back in. Now we can go ahead and remove the bolts up here, or the nuts for the shock. Now you're going to be careful when you pull these out, because when you pull the last one out, the whole strut shock assembly is going to want to drop. So on the last one, we're going to have to catch it as it's coming down. What do you guys see right now? All right, good. So what I like to do now, as I pull the last one out, is I'll come over here and I'll keep my hand on the shock, just to keep it from falling. All right, now we can wiggle this loose and get it down and out. Like so. And out it comes. All right, let the fun begin. All right, guys, so our next step here is kind of dangerous. So we're gonna do this outside. So if the spring somehow unsprings, it doesn't damage anything in my garage. But we just went ahead and sprayed this center nut here down with some penetrating oil. And now we're gonna use our spring compressors and compress this spring so that we can zap the center nut off of this strut. So we're gonna set it down here. Let's open up the compressor and let's start compressing. This is a good opportunity to inspect your shock or strut for damage, leaks, things of the sort. But let's go ahead and set up our compressor here. All right, so there's one. Now you're going to want to do these 180 degrees from each other, so directly across. All right, and now we're just gonna tighten these up just enough to get the tension off of the top hat of this strut. Basically, we're gonna wait until the spring will spin freely in the shock. Alright guys, so what you're going to see here now is this spring is loose. So now we can go ahead and zip the top nut off of the strut and take the mount off. It's going to be a 17mm. Okay, that comes right off. Now we can go ahead and remove the mount and the spring, like so. So now we have to get up in here and remove the bump stop, because we are going to have to modify it for our new springs.
This plastic ring gets removed and we're going to cut a 1/2 inch off of this bump stop. Alright guys, here's our new springs. Skinny end goes down, fat end goes up. Alright guys, so here's the spring we removed. This is one of the front ones. And these are your new front springs. The front ones are going to be the shorter set of the springs that come in your new package. So we already went ahead and installed one of these springs on the shock we removed, or the strut we removed. The center nut is nice and tight. You are going to have to compress these springs in order to be able to thread and tighten your center nut down. But now that that's done, we can go ahead, get these in the car. All right, guys. So we went ahead, we reconnected our ABS sensor. We just zapped this bottom bolt back in with our impact gun. I'm sure there's a torque spec, really doesn't matter that much. And then we just have to go ahead and put this back in. You don't have to kill this thing, snug it up until you can get your cotter pin in. And then these guys up here, we have to tighten to 49 foot-pounds. So we're just gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're gonna jump onto the other side. I'll put you on a time lapse. We'll get that shock out, or strut, do the same thing with those springs, and then we'll move on to the back.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Just like the sunrise, we gonna let it rain. Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Tonight we gonna let it rain. Just like the sunrise, we gonna let it rain.
All right, guys, so the front is all done. You'll see our nice green springs up here. Pardon my doorbell. But now we're going to go ahead, put the front wheels back on. We're gonna rip the back wheels off, and let's get started back there. All right, guys, we got the back wheel off, so now we're gonna go ahead and switch to back here. So here is your back spring. This car uses what is called a divorced setup. So the spring and the shock are separate. Now, when we do these springs, we are going to need to remove the shock in order to modify the bump stops in the manner that Tein wants us to. And then we also have upper control arms that we are going to be installing that will allow this suspension to be adjustable, meaning we'll be able to adjust the camber a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to put a jack right under this control arm, and we need to take these two bolts out. There's a nut on the other side, and then we need to remove down here the bolt for this sway bar end link. And once we get that out, we'll be able to loosen our jack, and that will allow the spring to basically swing out from that lower control arm, and then we are home free to go ahead and pull the shock and reinstall everything. Now, to get to the shock, the top mount bolts, we are going to have to take this trunk liner apart, so I am going to have to figure out how to do that, and once I do, I will show you. Alright guys, so we did some disassembling here, and we now have access to the top of the strut towers, or the shock towers, whatever you want to call them. You'll see there's 3 bolts there, and 3 bolts there, and that is effectively how we remove our shock. So, now I'm going to go ahead, like I told you we were going to do before, we're going to set that jack up under the lower control arm. We're going to pull the shock bolt out, we're going to pull the bolt for the knuckle out, and then we're going to let the jack down, and the spring should fall right out. Alright guys, and here is what you should have. You should have your lower control arm folded all the way down. Here's your shock, here's your sway bar end link, and then we did have to pull the bolt and nut out of this this bar here in order to get the lower control arm to drop. But now we're just going to go ahead, we're going to pull our shock, pull the mount off, modify that bump stop. I'll show you exactly how to do that. And then this side goes back together and we go back over onto the other side. Alright guys, so if you follow the directions here for the GS-F, the cut style that we have is E right here. So they want you to cut about a 1/2 inch off the bottom and then cut it again right here flush with this ring in order to get this ring off, and then they want you to use the top half and the bottom half and get rid of this. But I didn't think that made much sense, because why am I going to put two pieces of bump stop back in? So I decided to just go ahead and cut the ring here and here, and now I'll show you. The ring comes right off like so, and now we have a 1-piece bump stop to go ahead and put back into the shock. It's not 2 pieces. So the only thing that's different is we cut that bottom piece off and then the plastic ring. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put this back into the shock. It actually goes into the mount here, up like this, down at the bottom here. So we're going to go ahead and slide that in, put the shock back together, and then we are good to go ahead and I guess we're going to go ahead and pull this camber arm out. Now that the spring's not in the way, we have a little bit more room in there. We'll pull that camber arm out and install our new Figs camber arm. Alright guys, so we have our upper camber arm here out, and the whole suspension is just kind of hanging out right now. But what I have over here is the old arm and the new arm. And what we went ahead and did is we set this new arm with bolts here. We put a bolt in through here and a bolt in through here, and we used them to set this new Figs control arm to the same length as what we are removing. Now that we know it's at the same length, I'm going to go ahead and pull these bolts out, and I'm going to go about a 1/4 inch longer, and then I'm going to get my other Figs bar and match that to the new one. And what making them slightly longer is going to do is push the top of the wheel out towards the body of the car to compensate for it lowering, because when it lowers, it wants to pivot in this way towards the inside of the car. So we're gonna ballpark it. We're gonna go, like I said, about a 1/4 inch longer than the factory ones, and then once we get it on an alignment rack, we will fine tune it. But that's what I'm gonna do for my starting point. So let me go ahead. I'm gonna unbolt this contraption here. I'm gonna get the other Figs bar, which is right here, set it to the same length as the other new one, and then we're gonna go ahead and throw it in the car. Alright guys, we got both of these new uppers adjusted so they are both the same length. So now we know that they're going to be even on both sides. And like I said, this is just the ballpark us to get us in the ballpark for when we go ahead and get it aligned. So now we're going to go ahead and throw these in. And we are just going to install the hardware loosely here because we do not want to tighten these and mess up the bushings just yet. You want it to be as close to the the ride height that you're setting it to as possible in order for the bushings to not be under a preload. So let's go ahead and get these in the car, and I'll show you where we're at. All right, guys, so to say this thing kicked my butt today would be a complete understatement here. But we have everything in. We have our camber arm in. We jacked the suspension up until the car lifted off of the quick jacks, and then we tightened everything down. That's when we did our final torque. You don't ever want to torque it until it's under a load. So everything back here on this side is good. We're just gonna kind of bring all this stuff inside. We're gonna call it a night for now. But tomorrow we're gonna finish up here on the driver's side. And then we have one more thing to install in the front end, which is our steering response kit. And then we're gonna be done and get it aligned. Stay tuned, we'll be back with you tomorrow, finish it up. All right, guys, we decided to come back out tonight and just bang this side out. So here it is, all done. Springs in, shocks in. We modified the bump stop like I showed you, put in our camber bolt, jacked the suspension up, loaded it up, tightened everything down. So now I can put my trunk back together, which probably gonna take me a few minutes. And then the only thing we have left to do, suspension-wise on this, is the Figs lower control arm bushings for the front end. But that's gonna be in a separate video. Don't mind me, I'm a sweaty mess.
All right, guys, and this is the finished product. You'll see we have a lot less wheel gap in the front. For some reason, in the back, this side sits a little bit higher than this side. So I am just gonna jack the car up at some point, not today, but I am gonna jack the car up. I'm gonna loosen all of the bushings, and then I'm gonna lower the control arms onto some jack stands and then tighten everything back up, just so that I know I don't have any bushing preload, kind of preloading the suspension. But if everything is okay there, I guess the springs just need some more time to settle, which really isn't uncommon.
If this helped you do lowering springs or coilovers or what have you on your 2016 to 21 Lexus GS-F, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm sweating my butt off. And we'll see you next time.